Do you believe this performance will be consistent?
Hello, are you?
Yes, are you there with us? Can you hear me?
No, I can't. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Aziz.
The State Bank report has a mixed message. There are certain things which may improve and certain things which would not improve. The initial reports about the damage to the GDP was much higher. Now there may be some recovery because the rabi crops will be better, and cotton industry is reviving for other reasons, the global reasons. So you may get a growth rate of closer to 3% rather than 2%. So this is the first dimension. The second dimension, of course, is the balance of payments. There, of course, the import requirements are much higher. We are importing sugar, we are importing a number of other items. But the surge in textile export, already 20% in the first quarter, will compensate partly for that. Plus, aid is coming on a larger scale for flood relief and other development rehabilitation sectors. So we may see a slight improvement in the balance of payments.
Okay, do you feel, Mr. Aziz, that this report of the State Bank could have ignored the effect of floods? Because the inflation rate is being projected at around 14.5%, whereas we heard the Prime Minister himself say when the floods had struck that inflation would be around 19 to 20%. Why is that? How realistic then it raises questions these figures are that are revealed in this report?
See, first of all, at that time it was affected by the first quarter when the flood created shortages and disruption of transport. So we did get a food inflation of 20% in September when there was disruption. Now seem to be coming out, and since we had wheat stocks, so normally, it of course, I'm not saying that this will happen. It depends on how we handle these shortages, how we handle the rabi crop, how we handle the some of the shortages. So I think from that point of view, in my view, we should not further increase the wheat price from 950 rupees further, because this already compensates the cost of production and is in line with the global prices. So subject to these things, if we maintain the inflation rate at 13 to 14%, which was last year's rate, we would have done quite well. So it's an improvement on the previous estimate. But the real issue which the State Bank report highlights is the fiscal deficit. They're saying it's 6% instead of the target of 4%. In my view, it could be higher because it does not include the losses of corporation. Mm-hmm. So on the whole, I think my real worry is the fiscal deficit, which is the sum total reflection of poor governance, whether it's corporation, whether it's circular debt, whether it's the high cost of energy and involving subsidies. So I think that remains. In other words, other things may stabilize a little, but our fiscal situation is very, very worrisome. And if that does not correct it and we continue to borrow from the central bank the same rate as in the first quarter, which is almost 200 billion, then of course the inflation would be difficult to control. But in this context, I think the American the coalition support fund balance of $2.5 billion, at least the Governor State Bank said that if that had been received, we wouldn't have to borrow that much. That we should push. I'm surprised that the strategic dialogue did not mention or highlight that particular point. But the overall fiscal deficit situation remains very worrisome.
And this report also advises the government to, curtail its own expenditure. Do you think that is an achievable thing? Perhaps the first step government could take towards improving the things among so many other factors that you point out?
I think it's priority number one, and it's not only achievable, it's very doable. But if the government doesn't start, for example, look at the number of ministries. The 18th Amendment has said the number of ministers should not increase 11% of the total size of the National Assembly, which means something like 35 to 40 ministers. Why do we wait for the next election, and why don't we start reducing them now? Although they say because of 18th Amendment we'll reduce 10 ministries, but that's not enough. If I were to recommend a across-the-board solution, a 20% across-the-board cut on all development expenditure, and then the ministries will themselves find out what should they do to achieve these economies. That will be a signal to the outside world also that we are tightening our own belt and we are mobilizing resources. Punjab is doing something like that, but I think the federal government needs to do much more.
All right, so let's see.